The sound of splintering wood split the mountain air like a gunshot, and Zara Flint knew in that instant her life was about to change forever. The stagecoach lurched violently to the left as the rear axle gave way with a sickening crack. She grabbed for the leather strap beside her head, but missed as the entire vehicle tilted at an impossible angle. The driver's panicked shout cut through the chaos as the horses screamed, their iron shoes sparking against stone. Then came the second terrible sound, the front wheel assembly breaking apart, metal and wood screaming against the mountain trail. "Hold on!" the driver yelled, but his words were swallowed by the grinding crash as the coach dropped onto its belly and skidded toward the edge. Zara's heart hammered against her ribs. Through the window she could see nothing but sky and clouds, the ground disappearing into a terrifying void of empty air. They were so high up the mountains outside Fort Garland that the town below looked like a collection of matchboxes scattered across brown earth. It was October 1879, and she had been traveling from Denver to meet her aunt in New Mexico territory when the mountain pass had claimed its latest victim. The coach finally shuddered to a stop, balanced precariously with its front half hanging over the cliff's edge. Zara didn't dare move. She could hear the driver scrambling down from his perch, his boots hitting rock with desperate urgency. The other passenger, an elderly gentleman who had spent most of the journey snoring, was pressed against the opposite side, his face pale as fresh snow. "Don't move!" the driver called through the window. "Not an inch! The whole thing could go over." Zara's breath came in shallow gasps. She was 22 years old, had survived scarlet fever as a child, had nursed her mother through consumption until the end, had crossed half the country alone to start a new life. She wasn't ready to die on this God-forsaken mountain. "Can you get us out?" the elderly man asked, his voice trembling. "The wheels are gone, both axles cracked clean through. I can get you out, sir, if you move real careful toward the back. But the lady—" The driver's voice trailed off, and Zara understood immediately. She was sitting in the downhill seat, the one closest to the void. Any shift in weight toward the rear might tip the whole coach over the edge. "Then get me out first and we'll figure out the lady," the old man said. The driver worked carefully, opening the uphill door and helping the gentleman climb out onto solid ground. Zara pressed herself against the seat, making herself as small as possible. Every breath felt like it might be the one that tipped the balance. "Miss Flint," the driver said, crouching by the door opening. His face was weathered and kind, probably 50 years old with gray threading through his beard. "I need you to listen carefully. If you try to climb toward me, the weight shift is going to send this coach right over. The horses are cut loose and safe, but this vehicle is held by nothing but luck and a few rocks." "What do I do?" Her voice sounded steadier than she felt. "Stay put while I go for help. There's a trapper's cabin about half a mile back down the trail. Fellow named Barrett Morrow lives there. If anyone can get you out of this, it's him. And if the coach goes over before you get back," the driver's expression said everything his words didn't. "It won't. Just don't move." He disappeared, and Zara was left with only the wind and the creak of wood settling against stone. The old gentleman peered down at her from above, his face creased with worry. "You're a brave girl," he said. "What brings you out to Colorado territory?" "My aunt has a boarding house in Santa Fe. She needs help running it." Zara tried to focus on his face instead of the emptiness beyond the window. "I've never seen the mountains before this trip. They're more frightening than I imagined. They're beautiful and deadly, like most things worth seeing." He shifted his weight, and a small shower of pebbles skittered down the slope. "I'm going to move back from the edge, miss. My weight might not be helping, but I won't go far." She nodded, and he retreated. Now she was truly alone, suspended between earth and sky, waiting for a stranger to save her life. Time moved strangely. The sun climbed higher, warming the air despite the October chill. Zara's legs cramped from holding still, but she didn't dare adjust her position. She thought about her mother's last words. "Live bold, my darling. Live the life I never got to have." This seemed a bit too bold. Voices eventually drifted up the trail. The driver was talking to someone in low, urgent tones. Then a new voice answered, deeper and calmer, with an accent that spoke of education mixed with wilderness living. "I see it. That's balanced on prayer alone." The voice paused. "You got rope in your kit?" "Not enough for that drop." "I've got rope at my cabin, but I don't think we need it. I'll go out there and bring her back." That coach could go over any second. Then I better not waste time talking about it. Footsteps approached, careful and measured. Zara turned her head slightly and saw him for the first time through the uphill window. He was crouched at the opening, studying the situation with intense gray eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Barrett Morrow looked like he had been carved from the mountain itself. His shoulders were impossibly broad, straining against a worn leather vest over a dark workshirt. His arms were thick with muscle, visible where his sleeves were rolled to the elbows. Dark hair fell past his collar, sun-streaked and wild, and a beard shadowed his jaw. He looked to be around 28 or 30, weathered by outdoor living, but handsome, in a rough, elemental way. "Miss Flint, I'm Barrett Morrow. I'm going to get you out of here, but I need you to follow my instructions exactly. Can you do that?" "Yes." Her voice came out as barely a whisper. "Good. The coach is balanced with you as a counterweight. When I climb in, I'm going to move fast and low to keep the center of gravity stable. When I reach you, I'm going to lift you and carry you out. Don't try to help, don't try to climb. Just let me do the work, understand?" "I understand. If something goes wrong and the coach starts to tip, I'm going to throw you toward the door. It'll be rough, but it'll get you clear. Trust me." She met his eyes, those steady gray eyes that seemed afraid of nothing. "I trust you." He nodded once, then moved with surprising grace for such a large man. The coach rocked slightly as his weight entered it, and Zara's heart leaped into her throat. But Barrett had already calculated the angle, moving in a crouch that kept his mass distributed low and centered. He crossed the interior in 3 long strides, and then he was there, close enough that she could smell pine smoke and leather and mountain air on him. "Put your arms around my neck," he said quietly. She obeyed, and his arms slid beneath her, one under her knees and one behind her back. He lifted her like she weighed nothing at all, muscles bunching beneath his shirt. The coach groaned and shifted. "Hold tight," he murmured against her hair, and then he was moving, turning in the confined space, his boots finding purchase on the tilted floor. 3 strides back, the coach tipping further with each step, Wood screaming. The driver appeared in the doorway, reaching out, and Barrett practically threw her into the man's arms before vaulting out himself. Behind them, the stagecoach gave one final protest, and then slid over the edge with a sound like the earth breaking. It tumbled down the mountainside, shattering into pieces that scattered across the rocks hundreds of feet below. Zara stood on solid ground, shaking, still feeling the ghost of Barrett's arms around her. He was breathing hard, his hands on his knees, staring at the place where the coach had been. "That was closer than I'd like," he said. "You saved my life." The words felt inadequate. He straightened and looked at her fully for the first time, really looked at her. Zara was suddenly aware of how she must appear travel-worn and dusty, her dark hair falling from its pins, her blue dress rumpled from hours in the coach. But something in his expression made her feel seen rather than examined. "You kept your head in there. That saved your own life." He turned to the driver. "Your coach is kindling at the bottom of the canyon. You're going to need to report this in Fort Garland." "Those folks need to get down the mountain," the driver said. "Miss Flint was headed to New Mexico, and Mr. Pemberton here has business in Fort Garland." Fort Garland is a 3-hour walk down this trail, in the dark, on uncertain ground, with no supplies. Barrett shook his head. "It's past noon now. You won't make it before nightfall, and this trail is dangerous in the dark." "What do you suggest?" the elderly Mr. Pemberton asked. Barrett was quiet for a moment, clearly weighing options. "My cabin is half a mile back. It's small, but it's warm, and I've got food. You can all stay the night, and I'll guide you down to Fort Garland in the morning. There's a freight wagon that comes through town twice a week. You can catch a ride from there to wherever you're heading." The driver looked relieved. "That's generous of you, Morrow. It's practical. People die on these mountains from making foolish decisions. Staying up here overnight without preparation would be foolish." He looked at Zara again. "Can you walk, Miss Flint?" Her legs felt like water, but she nodded. "I can walk." "Then let's get moving before the weather turns." Barrett's cabin was indeed small, but it was solid and well made, tucked into a grove of pine trees with a view of the valley below that stole Zara's breath. The main room held a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, and a bed built into one corner. A smaller room off to the side appeared to be storage for food and supplies. I don't have much in the way of accommodations, Barrett said, moving to build up the fire. Miss Flint can have the bed. You gentlemen can take the floor by the fire. I'll sleep outside. It's October, Zara protested. You'll freeze. I've slept in worse conditions. He didn't look at her as he said it, focused on arranging kindling. I've got good blankets and a lean-to out back that blocks the wind. I'll be fine. She wanted to argue, but the set of his shoulders suggested the matter was closed. The driver and Mr. Pemberton settled themselves by the growing fire, and Barrett moved to his storage room, emerging with dried venison, hardtack, and a jar of what looked like preserved berries. It's not fancy, he said, setting the food on the table, but it'll keep you going. They ate in relative silence, the exhaustion of the day catching up with all of them. Zara found herself watching Barrett when she thought he wasn't looking. He moved with efficient grace around the small space, clearly comfortable in his solitude. There was something both gentle and formidable about him, like a wolf that could choose to be tame but never truly was. How long have you lived up here? She asked. 3 years. He was cutting the venison into portions with a knife that looked well used and well cared for. I came out from Boston after the war. The war? She did the math. You must have been young when you fought. 17 when I enlisted, 20 when it ended. His voice was neutral, but something in his eyes went distant. Came west to find something different than what I left behind. And did you find it? He looked at her directly then, and she felt the weight of that gaze like a physical thing. I found peace, Miss Flint. That's more than most men get. The driver cleared his throat. Morrow here is something of a legend in Fort Garland. Lived through 2 winters up here completely alone. Knows these mountains better than anyone. It's my job to know them, Barrett said simply. I trap and hunt, sell furs in town. The mountain provides if you know how to listen to it. Night fell quickly at this altitude, the temperature dropping with the sun. Barrett brought in extra blankets and made sure the fire was built up high. He showed Zara where the water bucket was, where to find the chamber pot if needed during the night, and how to bank the fire if it got too hot. The door bars from the inside, he told her. Though there's nothing up here to worry about except maybe a curious bear, and they're getting ready to den for winter. Thank you, she said, for everything. I don't know how to repay you. No payment needed. It's what anyone would do. But the way he said it suggested he knew that wasn't quite true. Not everyone would risk their life climbing into a balanced stagecoach to save a stranger. He went outside into the cold, and Zara lay down on his bed, wrapped in blankets that smelled of pine and wood smoke. Through the small window she could see stars scattered across the sky like diamond dust. She could hear the driver and Mr. Pemberton snoring by the fire, their bodies warm and safe. And she thought about Barrett Morrow outside in his lean-to, choosing the cold rather than impose on their space, and wondered what kind of man chose to live alone on a mountain, cut off from the world. Sleep came slowly, and when it did, she dreamed of falling and being caught by strong arms that refused to let her go. Morning arrived with pale sunlight filtering through the pines and the smell of coffee brewing. Zara woke to find Barrett already inside, tending the fire and heating water in a battered pot. His hair was damp, suggesting he'd washed in the stream she'd heard running somewhere nearby, and he moved quietly to avoid waking the other men. When he noticed she was awake, he nodded toward the coffee. It's strong, he said softly. Fair warning. She sat up, accepting a tin cup from him. Their fingers brushed in the exchange, and she felt an unexpected jolt of warmth. I like it strong. The coffee was indeed strong enough to strip paint, but it was hot and good, and it chased away the morning chill. Barrett moved back to the fire, turning something in a skillet. Eggs, she realized. Fresh eggs. I didn't think you'd have eggs up here, she said. I don't usually, but I traded for some in town last week. Lucky timing. He slid 2 of the eggs onto a tin plate and handed it to her with a fork. Eat. It's a long walk down to Fort Garland. The driver and Mr. Pemberton woke shortly after, and Barrett fed them as well with the quiet efficiency of a man used to taking care of things. They ate quickly, aware of the journey ahead, and then Barrett was banking the fire and gathering supplies into a pack. The trail is tricky in places, he said. Stay behind me and watch where I step. If I tell you to stop or move, do it immediately. Understood? They all agreed, and then they were outside in the crisp morning air, beginning the descent. The trail was every bit as treacherous as Barrett had suggested. In places it narrowed to barely 2 feet wide, with steep drops on one side and rock face on the other. Barrett moved ahead of them with sure steps, occasionally stopping to help Mr. Pemberton over rough patches or to point out loose rocks that could turn an ankle. Zara found herself watching the way his body moved, the flex of muscle beneath his shirt, the easy strength with which he lifted fallen branches from the path or steadied the older man. There was something hypnotic about it, something that made her heart beat a little faster. "Careful here," he said, reaching back to offer her his hand over a particularly rough section. His palm was calloused and warm, his grip strong without being crushing. He held her hand just a moment longer than necessary, his eyes meeting hers. "Thank you," she said, and was surprised at how breathless she sounded. They continued down, the sun climbing higher, the air growing warmer. Barrett pointed out landmarks as they went: the peak where eagles nested, the meadow where elk gathered in summer, the stand of aspen that turned gold in autumn. He spoke about the mountain with the kind of love usually reserved for people. "Do you ever get lonely up here?" Zara asked during a rest stop where Barrett had shared around his water canteen. He considered the question seriously. "Sometimes. But loneliness is different than being alone. I'm alone most of the time, but I'm not often lonely. The mountain is company enough." "That seems like a hard way to live." "It's an honest way to live." He looked at her with those steady gray eyes. "In Boston, I was surrounded by people and lonely every day. Out here, I'm alone and at peace. I'll take the second over the first." "What happened in Boston?" His expression closed slightly. "The war happened. I came home and nothing fit right anymore. The city felt too small and too crowded at the same time. The noise was constant. People talked but never said anything that mattered." He paused. "I felt like I was suffocating. So I came west, and I kept going until I found a place where I could breathe again." Zara understood that more than she could say. She'd felt suffocated in Pennsylvania after her mother died, the town full of pitying looks and whispered conversations. The decision to come west had been about finding a place where she could be someone other than poor Zara Flint, whose mother died of consumption. "I think I understand," she said quietly. Something shifted in his expression, a softening around the edges. "I think you might." They reached Fort Garland by early afternoon. The town was a collection of buildings clustered around the old military fort, serving as a way station for travelers and a supply center for ranchers and prospectors in the region. The driver headed immediately to report the stagecoach accident to the local marshal, while Mr. Pemberton went to find his business associate. Barrett led Zara to the general store, where a freight wagon was indeed preparing to depart for Point South. "This is Murphy," Barrett said, introducing her to a grizzled man loading supplies. "He runs freight to Santa Fe twice a month. Murphy, this is Miss Zara Flint. Her stagecoach had an accident on the mountain pass yesterday. She needs transport to Santa Fe." Murphy looked her over and nodded. "I've got room. Cost you $3 for the ride, but it's safer than the stage and will get you there in 4 days." $3 is fine," Zara said, though it was most of what she had left in her purse. "When do you leave?" "Dawn tomorrow. I'm staying at the boarding house tonight. You'll want to do the same." He gestured toward a 2-story building down the street. "Mrs. Chen runs it. Tell her I sent you." Zara thanked him and turned to Barrett, suddenly aware that this might be goodbye. The thought made her chest tighten in an unexpected way. "I should let you get back to your cabin," she said. "I need to get some supplies while I'm in town," he said. "Mind if I walk you to the boarding house first?" She minded very much, but not in the way he meant. She didn't want him to walk her to the boarding house because it would mean their time together was ending, and she wasn't ready for that. But she nodded, and they walked together down the dusty street. Fort Garland was busy with afternoon activity ranchers buying supplies, women shopping, children playing in the street. People nodded to Barrett as they passed, respect in their greetings. He was clearly known here, if not quite part of the community. The boarding house was neat and well kept, with a painted sign announcing rooms for rent and meals available. Barrett held the door for her, and they stepped into a cool interior that smelled of cooking and lemon oil. A small Chinese woman emerged from a back room, her face lighting up when she saw Barrett. "Barrett Morrow, you finally come down from your mountain, and you bring a lady friend." Her eyes sparkled with curiosity. "This is Miss Flint, Mrs. Chen. Her stagecoach had an accident. She needs a room for tonight before she catches Murphy's freight wagon tomorrow." Mrs. Chen's expression shifted to concern. The stagecoach accident we heard about? The one that went over the cliff? You were on that? I was, Zara confirmed. Barrett saved my life. Of course he did. He's a good man, even if he is too stubborn to live like normal people. Mrs. Chen patted Barrett's arm affectionately. I have a room available, Miss Flint. Clean sheets, good meals, and the bathhouse is out back. $1 for the night, includes dinner and breakfast. Zara paid, and Mrs. Chen handed her a key. Room 3, top of the stairs. Dinner's at 6. You're welcome to join us too, Barrett. I appreciate it, but I need to get my supplies and head back before dark. He turned to Zara, and suddenly the moment felt weighted with things unsaid. It was good to meet you, Miss Flint. I hope Santa Fe treats you well. Thank you again, she said. For everything. I'll never forget what you did. He nodded, and then he was turning away, walking back out into the afternoon sun. Zara watched him go, feeling something like loss settle in her chest. Mrs. Chen clicked her tongue softly. That's a good man walking away, you know. I know, Zara said, but he lives on a mountain, and I'm going to Santa Fe. Some things just don't work out. Some things work out if you make them work out. Mrs. Chen gave her a knowing look. But maybe you're not the kind of girl who fights for what she wants. The words stung because they felt true. Zara had spent so much of her life being practical, being sensible, doing what was expected. Her mother had been the dreamer, and Zara had been the one who held things together. Even coming west had been practical. Her aunt needed help, and Zara needed a new start. But when had she last fought for something she wanted just because she wanted it? She went upstairs to her room, a small but comfortable space with a real bed and clean linens. Through the window she could see the street below, and in the distance, the mountains rising against the sky. Barrett was up there somewhere, returning to his cabin and his solitary life. Dinner that evening was a lively affair. Mrs. Chen's boarding house was full of travelers and locals, and the meal was served family-style around a long table. Zara sat between a rancher's wife and a young prospector, listening to their conversations without really hearing them. Her mind kept drifting back to the moment when Barrett had lifted her from the stagecoach, the certainty of his movements, the way he'd carried her like she was something precious. She thought about his hands, scarred and strong, his eyes gray as storm clouds, the way he spoke about the mountain with such love. She thought about the fact that she might never see him again, and the thought made her inexplicably sad. That night she lay in bed, listening to the sounds of the town, distant music from a saloon, dogs barking, the low murmur of voices. It was so different from the quiet of the mountain, from the vast silence that Barrett lived in. What would it be like to live that way? To choose solitude over society, to find peace in the wilderness? What would it be like to live that way with someone? The thought came unbidden and shocking. She barely knew Barrett Morrow. They'd spent less than a day in each other's company. It was absurd to be thinking about him this way, to be imagining a future that made no sense. But her heart didn't seem to care about sense. Morning came too early. Zara dressed in the dim pre-dawn light and packed her small traveling bag. She'd lost her trunk in the stagecoach accident, but she still had the bag she'd kept at her feet, a few extra clothes, her mother's Bible, and the letter from her aunt. Murphy's freight wagon was already loaded and ready when she came downstairs. Mrs. Chen pressed a packet of food into her hands. For the journey, she said. And Miss Flint? Sometimes the practical choice isn't the right choice. Think about that. Zara thanked her and climbed up onto the wagon seat beside Murphy. The sun was just beginning to paint the sky pink and gold. The horses stamped and snorted, eager to be moving. Hold on! A voice called from down the street. Zara's heart leaped. Barrett was striding toward them, moving fast, his pack on his back. He reached the wagon and looked up at her, slightly out of breath. I've been thinking, he said, and I need to say something before you leave. Barrett, we're on a schedule, Murphy said, though not unkindly. This will just take a minute. Barrett's eyes never left Zara's face. Miss Flint, Zara, I know we just met. I know this doesn't make sense. But yesterday when I carried you out of that stagecoach, something happened. I felt something I haven't felt in a long time, maybe ever, and I can't let you leave without telling you that. Zara's breath caught. What are you saying? I'm saying that I've spent 3 years alone on that mountain, telling myself I was content. And maybe I was. But yesterday I met you, and I realized that content isn't the same as happy. Content is settling for good enough, and you made me want more than good enough. Barrett, I know you have a life waiting for you in Santa Fe. I know your aunt is expecting you. I know I have no right to ask you to change your plans for a stranger. But I'm asking anyway. He reached up, his hand extended. Stay. Give me a chance to court you properly. Give us a chance to see if what I felt yesterday was real. Murphy made a noise that might have been approval or impatience. Zara's mind was racing, practical thoughts warring with the wild hope rising in her chest. My aunt needs me, she said weakly. Send her a telegram. Explain the situation. If she really needs you, you can go later, but at least stay long enough to know if this is worth pursuing. I don't know anything about living on a mountain. Neither did I before I moved there. I'll teach you. His hand was still extended, steady and sure. I know I'm asking a lot. I know this is crazy. But Zara, I've been half alive for 3 years, and one day with you made me feel whole again. I can't let that go without a fight. Mrs. Chen had said she wasn't the kind of girl who fought for what she wanted. But maybe she could be. Maybe it was time to be. Zara looked at Barrett's outstretched hand. She thought about her mother saying, "Live bold, my darling." She thought about the way Barrett's arms had felt carrying her to safety, the way his eyes saw her truly, the way her heart had known him somehow despite the impossibility of it. She thought about practical choices and right choices and the difference between the two. Then she took his hand and climbed down from the wagon. "I'll stay," she said, "for a while, to see." The smile that broke across Barrett's face was like sunrise, transforming him from handsome to beautiful. He pulled her close, not quite embracing, but near enough that she could feel the warmth of him, smell the pine smoke and leather and mountain air. "You won't regret this," he said softly. "I promise you won't regret this." Murphy shook his head, but he was grinning. "Young people and their romance. I'll be back through in 2 weeks, Miss Flint, if you change your mind." But as Murphy's wagon rolled away and Barrett's hand tightened around hers, Zara knew she wouldn't change her mind. Somehow, impossibly, she was exactly where she needed to be. The next 2 weeks unfolded like a dream made real. Barrett rented Zara a room at Mrs. Chen's boarding house, insisting on propriety even as he spent every daylight hour with her. He came down from the mountain each morning and returned each evening, and in between, they learned each other. He took her walking through the hills around Fort Garland, teaching her to read animal tracks and identify edible plants. He showed her how to move quietly through the forest, how to read the weather in the clouds, how to find north by the stars. His patience was endless, his teaching style gentle but thorough. "You're a quick learner," he said one afternoon as she successfully identified a deer track in the soft earth. "I had a good teacher." She looked up at him, shading her eyes against the autumn sun. "Do you miss Boston at all?" "I miss my sister sometimes. She was the only family I had left after the war. But she married well and has her own life now. We write occasionally." He helped her to her feet, his hand warm and solid around hers. "What about you? Do you miss Pennsylvania?" "I miss my mother every day, but Pennsylvania itself, no. There was nothing left for me there after she died. Too many memories, too much grief." She found herself telling him things she'd never told anyone about the endless months of watching her mother waste away, about the suffocating weight of the townspeople's pity, about feeling like she was drowning in other people's expectations. Barrett listened without judgment, without trying to fix things or offer empty platitudes. He just listened, and somehow that was exactly what she needed. In the evenings, they sat on Mrs. Chen's porch, talking until the stars came out. Barrett told her about the war, about the things he'd seen and done that still haunted his dreams sometimes. He told her about coming west with nothing but a pack and determination, about building his cabin with his own hands, about learning to survive and then learning to thrive. "The first winter almost killed me," he admitted. "I wasn't prepared and I was too proud to ask for help. I got snowed in for 3 weeks with dwindling supplies and no way to hunt. I thought I was going to starve." "What happened?" "A local Ute man named Running Deer found me. He and his family took me in, taught me how to survive a mountain winter properly. I owe them my life." He stared out at the darkening sky. "They don't come through this area much anymore. The government keeps pushing them onto smaller and smaller territory. It's wrong, what's being done to them. They were here first, and they lived in harmony with the land in a way we never have. Zara heard the anger and sorrow in his voice and loved him a little more for it. Barrett Morrow was a man who cared about justice, about right and wrong, about more than just his own comfort. On the 10th day, he took her up to his cabin. The climb was long but beautiful, the aspens blazing gold in the autumn sun. When they crested the final rise and the cabin came into view, Zara felt something settle in her chest. It looked right somehow, nestled among the pines with smoke curling from the chimney. "You lit a fire before you came down?" she asked. "I came up last night to prepare things. I wanted it to be welcoming." He looked almost nervous, like her opinion of his home mattered deeply. She walked through the small space, touching the smooth wood of the table, the soft furs on the bed, the collection of books on a rough shelf. They were an eclectic mix adventure novels, poetry, philosophy, natural history. A copy of Whitman's Leaves of Grass sat dog-eared and well-loved. "You're full of surprises, Barrett Morrow," she said, pulling the Whitman from the shelf. "A man's got to have something to do during the winter months besides stare at snow." He moved to the fire, adding wood with practiced ease. "I was never much of a student in Boston, but out here I found I actually enjoyed learning. No one was forcing me to do it, so it became pleasure instead of obligation." They spent the afternoon there, talking and reading and simply being together. Barrett made coffee and fried up trout he'd caught that morning in the stream. They ate sitting on a blanket outside, watching the valley below turn purple with shadow. "I could live here," Zara said softly. "I think I could be happy here." Barrett's hand found hers. "Are you sure?" "It's a hard life, Zara. The winters are brutal. We'd be snowed in for months. The closest neighbor is 5 miles away. It's isolation like you've never known. But I'd be with you. That makes all the difference." He turned to face her fully, his gray eyes intense. "I need you to be sure. Because if you stay, if we do this, I'm all in. I'll marry you, build a life with you, love you until the day I die. But I need to know you want that too. I need to know you're not going to wake up in January buried in snow and regret this decision." Zara thought about the question seriously. She thought about hard winters and isolation, about the challenges of living so far from civilization. She thought about what she'd be giving up: the security of her aunt's boarding house, the community of Santa Fe, the easier life she could have. Then she thought about Barrett's hands, steady and strong, his eyes seeing her truly, his mind sharp and curious, his heart offered to her with complete honesty. She thought about the way she felt when she was with him, alive and present and fully herself in a way she'd never been before. "I'm sure," she said. "I've never been more sure of anything." He kissed her then, the first real kiss they'd shared. It was gentle at first, almost tentative, then deeper as she responded. His hand cupped her face, his thumb stroking her cheekbone, and she felt the rightness of it down to her bones. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Zara Flint," he said. "I know it's fast, I know it's crazy, but I love you." "I love you too," she whispered back. "And yes, it's fast and crazy, and I don't care even a little bit." They returned to Fort Garland that evening with plans to marry. Barrett spoke to the local minister, who agreed to perform the ceremony the following week. Zara sent a telegram to her aunt, explaining the situation and promising to visit in the spring. The response came back the next day. "Follow your heart. Love is rare. Grab it with both hands." Mrs. Chen threw herself into wedding preparations with enthusiasm. She insisted on making Zara a proper dress from fabric in the general store, a simple but lovely design in deep blue that brought out Zara's eyes. The rancher's wife, who'd sat next to Zara at dinner, donated a lace collar that had belonged to her mother. The young prospector brought wildflowers from the hills. The whole town seemed invested in the wedding of the mountain man and the girl he'd saved from the stagecoach. It had become a romantic story, told and retold in the saloon and the general store, growing more dramatic with each telling. "By next month they'll be saying you fought off a grizzly bear while rescuing me," Zara laughed as Barrett relayed the latest version he'd heard. "Maybe I did. Maybe you just don't remember because of the trauma." His eyes sparkled with humor, and she swatted his arm. The wedding took place on a Sunday afternoon in late October, with autumn colors blazing around Fort Garland and the air crisp and cool. The minister performed the ceremony in the small church, with Mrs. Chen and her husband standing as witnesses, along with half the town crammed into the pews. Zara wore her blue dress with the lace collar and wildflowers in her hair. Barrett had bought a new shirt for the occasion and trimmed his beard, though his hair still fell wild and free past his collar. When she walked down the aisle and saw him waiting for her, saw the love and wonder in his eyes, she knew beyond doubt that this was right. "Dearly beloved," the minister began, and Zara barely heard the rest. She was too focused on Barrett, on his hands holding hers, on the vows they spoke to each other. "I, Barrett Morrow, take you, Zara Flint, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love you, honor you, protect you, and stand by you in sickness and in health, in joy and in sorrow for all the days of my life. I, Zara Flint, take you, Barrett Morrow, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love you, honor you, support you, and stand by you in sickness and in health, in joy and in sorrow, for all the days of my life." The rings were simple bands of silver, but they felt like the most precious things in the world as they slipped them onto each other's fingers. "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Barrett pulled her close and kissed her deeply, and the church erupted in applause and cheers. Mrs. Chen was crying happy tears. The rancher's wife was beaming. Even the grizzled Murphy had shown up and was clapping along with everyone else. The celebration continued at the boarding house, where Mrs. Chen had prepared a feast. There was music and dancing and laughter, and through it all Barrett kept Zara close, his hand at her waist, his eyes never leaving her for long. As the sun set and the party wound down, they finally slipped away. Barrett had prepared the cabin for their arrival, stocking it with supplies and making everything ready for winter. They climbed the mountain trail in the twilight, and this time Zara wasn't afraid. This time she was going home. The cabin was warm and welcoming when they arrived, the fire burning bright. Barrett lifted Zara over the threshold, making her laugh, and set her down gently inside. "Welcome home, Mrs. Morrow," he said. "It sounds perfect when you say it like that." She wrapped her arms around his neck, pulling him down for a kiss. That night they came together as husband and wife, learning each other with gentle hands and whispered words. Barrett was careful and patient, making sure she felt safe and cherished. When she finally fell asleep in his arms, the last thought in her mind was that she'd never felt so completely at peace. The first weeks of marriage were a time of adjustment and discovery. Zara learned the rhythms of mountain life, rising with the sun, maintaining the fire, preparing food, managing their supplies. Barrett taught her to set snares for rabbits and to fish in the cold stream. She taught him to make bread that didn't come out hard as stone and to organize their supplies so they could actually find things. They worked together, cutting and stacking firewood for winter, building up a massive pile against the cabin wall. Barrett showed her how to split logs properly, how to identify the best burning wood, how to tell when a tree was dead and safe to cut. "We'll need enough to last us from November through March, maybe into April depending on the snow," he explained. "That's a lot of fires, a lot of cold nights. We can't run out." Zara threw herself into the work, determined to pull her weight. Her hands blistered and her muscles ached, but she kept at it. Barrett noticed and tried to get her to rest, but she refused. "I'm not going to be a burden," she said stubbornly. "I'm going to be a partner." "You're already a partner, and partners know when to rest so they don't hurt themselves." He took the axe from her hands gently. "Let me finish this stack. You go check the snares and start dinner. That's partnership too, dividing the work according to what makes sense." She wanted to argue, but her hands were starting to bleed through the blisters. So she went and checked the snares, finding 2 rabbits, and by the time she had them cleaned and stewing, Barrett had finished with the wood and was cleaning himself up at the stream. They fell into a pattern, learning each other's strengths and weaknesses, figuring out how to work as a team. Barrett was better at the heavy physical labor and the hunting. Zara was better at organization and planning ahead. Together, they were more capable than either alone. The first snow came in mid-November, dusting the peaks white and making the air knife sharp with cold. Barrett took it as a sign to finish their winter preparations. He made one more trip down to Fort Garland, bringing back extra flour, salt, coffee, and lamp oil. Zara spent the time he was gone organizing their food stores and reinforcing the lean to where they kept their wood. When he returned, The snow was falling more heavily. He brought news from town along with the supplies. "Mrs. Chen sent you this," he said, handing Zara a package wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a beautiful quilt, stitched with care. "She said every bride needs a wedding present, and this will keep you warm through the winter." Zara felt tears prick her eyes. She'd only known Mrs. Chen for a few weeks, but the woman had been so kind, so welcoming. The quilt represented hours of work, a gift of time and effort. "I'll have to thank her in the spring," Zara said. "She said she knows you will. She also said to tell you that marriage is work, but it's the best work you'll ever do." Barrett pulled Zara close, wrapping his arms around her. "I think she's right about that." The snow kept falling, and within a week they were truly snowed in. The world beyond the cabin disappeared into white. Zara had never seen so much snow. It piled up past the windows, buried the wood pile, turned the landscape into something alien and beautiful. At first, the isolation was strange. Back in Pennsylvania, she'd been surrounded by people constantly. Even the journey west had involved other travelers, other voices. Now, it was just her and Barrett, alone in the wilderness with only the wind for company. But strange didn't mean bad. In fact, as the days passed, Zara found she loved it. She loved the quiet, broken only by the crackle of the fire and Barrett's voice reading aloud in the evenings. She loved the simplicity of their days: wake, eat, work, eat, rest, sleep. She loved the intimacy of being constantly together, learning every expression on Barrett's face, every tone of his voice. They talked for hours about everything and nothing. Barrett told her stories about his childhood in Boston, about the war, about his journey west. Zara told him about her mother, about growing up without a father, about the small joys and large sorrows of her life before they met. "Do you think your mother would have approved of me?" Barrett asked one evening as they lay in bed, listening to the wind howl outside. "She would have loved you," Zara said with certainty. "She always said I should find someone who saw me for who I really was, not who they wanted me to be. You see me, Barrett. You've seen me from the start. You're easy to see. You don't hide yourself away." He pulled her closer. "That's one of the things I love about you. You're honest, straightforward. No games, no pretense." "I never had the energy for games. Life was hard enough without making it harder." She traced patterns on his chest. "Do you ever regret not going back to Boston? Not trying to make a life there?" "Never. Boston was someone else's dream, not mine. This is mine. You are mine." He kissed her forehead. "No regrets, Zara. Not a single one." Christmas came, and they celebrated quietly together. Barrett had carved her a small wooden box with a fitted lid, perfect for keeping her mother's jewelry safe. Zara had used scraps of fabric to sew him a new shirt, the stitches careful and even. They exchanged gifts on Christmas morning and then made love while snow fell softly outside. And Zara thought that she'd never been happier in her entire life. The deep winter months were the hardest. January brought temperatures so cold that water froze solid in minutes. They had to keep the fire going constantly, and even then the cabin was barely warm enough. Barrett went out only to get firewood and check on emergency supplies he'd cached in a snow cave. Zara learned to cope with the darkness with only a few hours of daylight each day. Most of their waking time was spent by lamplight or firelight. She learned to manage the restlessness that came from being confined to such a small space. She learned patience, and she learned that she was pregnant. She'd suspected for a few weeks, but hadn't been certain. Her monthly cycle had always been irregular, and the stress of the move and the new life could have explained the lateness. But by late January, she was sure. The morning sickness started, and her breasts became tender, and she knew. She told Barrett on a quiet evening, just the two of them by the fire. He was reading aloud from one of his books, and she reached over and placed his hand on her still flat stomach. "There's going to be 3 of us by summer," she said softly. He went completely still, his eyes wide. "You're certain?" "As certain as I can be without a doctor. But yes, I'm certain." A smile spread across his face, slow and wondering. "We're going to have a baby. We're going to have a baby," she confirmed. He pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was made of glass. "I'm going to be a father. God, Zara, I never imagined I'd have this. A wife, a child, a family." "You have it now," she said. We have it." That night he held her close, his hand resting protectively over her stomach, and Zara felt the future unfolding before them, bright and full of promise. February brought slightly longer days and the occasional break in the clouds. Barrett became even more protective than before, insisting Zara rest more, do less of the heavy work. She tolerated it because she could see the love behind it, even when it frustrated her. "I'm pregnant, not made of porcelain," she said one afternoon when he tried to take a water bucket from her hands. "I know, but you're carrying our child, and I want to make sure both of you are safe." He set the bucket down and cupped her face in his hands. "Please, Zara, let me take care of you. It makes me feel better." How could she argue with that? So she let him carry the water and split all the wood and do most of the heavy work. And in return, she made sure he ate well and rested enough and didn't work himself into exhaustion trying to do everything. They were a team, and teams took care of each other. By March, the snow was starting to melt in earnest. Water ran everywhere, turning the world into a soggy mess. But it was beautiful too, the first green shoots pushing through the snow, the return of birdsong, the promise of spring. Barrett made the first trip down to Fort Garland in early April, when the trail was finally passable again. He needed to trade furs for supplies, and they both needed to see other human faces after months of isolation. The town welcomed them back like heroes. Mrs. Chen cried and hugged them both, exclaiming over Zara's small but visible baby bump. The rancher's wife gave advice about pregnancy and childbirth. Murphy, the freight driver, congratulated Barrett with a hearty slap on the back. "You two are the talk of the territory," Murphy said. "The romantic rescue, the quick wedding, now a baby on the way. People love a good love story." Zara felt herself blushing, but Barrett just laughed and pulled her close. "Let them talk. We're living the story, not telling it." They stayed in town for 3 days, restocking supplies and visiting with friends. The minister's wife, who had experience as a midwife, examined Zara and pronounced her healthy and strong. "The baby should come in late July or early August," she said. "Will you come down to town for the birth? It would be safer than being up on the mountain." Barrett and Zara discussed it that night in their room at Mrs. Chen's boarding house. "I think we should come down," Barrett said. "I've delivered foals and calves, but a human baby is different. I want you to have help if something goes wrong." "Nothing is going to go wrong," Zara said, but she knew he was right. Childbirth was dangerous, and being isolated on the mountain with no help nearby was foolish. "We'll come down in July. Maybe we can rent a room from Mrs. Chen for a month or so." "Already asked. She said we can stay as long as we need." They returned to the mountain cabin with light hearts and full packs. Spring unfolded around them in a riot of color and life, the meadows filled with wildflowers. Deer came down from the high country to graze. Birds nested in the pines. Zara's body changed with the seasons, her belly growing round and full. She felt the baby move for the first time in May, a flutter like butterfly wings. Barrett pressed his hand to her stomach and felt it too, his face full of wonder. "That's our child," he said, "growing inside you. It's a miracle, Zara." "It's biology," she teased, but she felt the miracle of it too. They spent the summer preparing for the baby's arrival. Barrett carved a cradle from pine, sanding it smooth and rubbing it with oil until it glowed. Zara sewed tiny clothes from soft fabric she'd bought in Fort Garland, each stitch placed with love. They talked about names, debating options, and laughing at the more ridiculous suggestions. "If it's a boy, we could name him Bear," Barrett suggested with a straight face. "Absolutely not. I'm not naming my child after an animal." "Mountain?" "Barrett Morrow if you don't stop." But she was laughing, and he was grinning, and everything was perfect. They came down to Fort Garland in late July when Zara's due date was close. Mrs. Chen fussed over them, making sure they had everything they needed. The minister's wife stopped by daily to check on Zara. The whole town seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for the baby to arrive. The labor started on a hot August afternoon, waves of pain that started mild and grew steadily stronger. The minister's wife came immediately, bringing supplies and calm competence. Barrett paced outside the room, unable to sit still, jumping at every sound. Mrs. Chen brought him food he didn't eat and tea he didn't drink. "First babies take time," she said kindly. "Your wife is strong. She'll be fine." The labor lasted through the night and into the next day. Barrett could hear Zara crying out, and it took every ounce of his self-control not to burst into the room. but the minister's wife had been clear he would only be in the way. Finally, in the early afternoon of the second day, a new sound filled the boarding house, the thin, angry wail of a newborn baby. Barrett shot to his feet, his heart pounding. The minister's wife appeared in the doorway, smiling. "You have a son, Mr. Morrow, a big, healthy boy, and your wife is tired but doing well." He rushed past her into the room. Zara lay in the bed, pale and exhausted but smiling. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. When she saw him, her smile widened. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Barrett approached slowly, almost afraid. The baby was so small, so perfect. He had a shock of dark hair and a red, wrinkled face. His eyes were squeezed shut, and his tiny fists waved in the air. "He's beautiful," Barrett whispered. "God, Zara, he's perfect." "He is, isn't he?" She looked down at their son with such love that Barrett felt his throat tighten. "I was thinking we could name him after your father. What was his name?" "James. James William Morrow." Barrett reached out tentatively and touched the baby's tiny hand. Immediately the infant's fingers closed around his, gripping with surprising strength. "Hello, James. I'm your father, and I promise I'm going to do everything I can to be worthy of you." The baby made a small sound, and Barrett felt his heart expand in a way he'd never experienced. This was his son, his family, his future. They stayed in Fort Garland for 2 weeks while Zara recovered her strength. The whole town came by to meet baby James, bringing gifts and advice and congratulations. Mrs. Chen held the baby and declared him the most handsome infant she'd ever seen. The rancher's wife brought clothes her own children had outgrown. Murphy brought a wooden horse he'd carved himself. When they finally made the journey back up to the cabin, it was late August and the air was starting to cool toward autumn. Barrett carried James in a sling he'd fashioned, keeping the baby close and warm. Zara walked beside him, stronger now, but still tired easily. The cabin had never looked more welcoming. They settled back into mountain life, now as a family of 3. The days were full of feeding and changing and rocking a baby who seemed to have strong opinions about everything. Barrett had faced down Confederate soldiers and survived brutal winters, but nothing had prepared him for the challenge of being a father to a newborn. "How is something so small so loud?" he asked one night as James screamed for no apparent reason. "I don't know, but I'm starting to think the war was quieter," Zara said, walking the floor with the baby. They were both exhausted, operating on broken sleep and patience. But then James would settle, looking up at them with dark eyes that were starting to focus, and all the exhaustion melted away. Or he'd fall asleep on Barrett's chest, tiny and warm and trusting, and Barrett would feel like his heart might burst from the love of it. The first year was hard. Babies were demanding, and adding one to the already challenging life on the mountain made everything more complicated. But it was also beautiful. Watching James grow and change, seeing his personality emerge, experiencing the world fresh through his eyes, it was a gift. By the time James was walking, they'd found their rhythm. Zara managed the household and cared for the baby, while Barrett hunted and trapped and maintained their supplies. They supported each other through the challenges, celebrated the victories, and fell more in love with each passing day. "Do you ever miss your old life?" Barrett asked one evening. James was asleep in his cradle, and they were sitting outside watching the sun set over the valley. "Not even a little bit. This is my life now, you and James in this mountain. It's everything I never knew I wanted." She leaned against him. "Do you miss yours?" "I don't think I had a life before you. I was just existing, waiting for something without knowing what. Then that stagecoach lost its wheels and everything changed." He kissed the top of her head. "Best accident that ever happened." "For both of us," Zara agreed. The years flowed by like the stream beside their cabin, constant and changing all at once. James grew into a sturdy boy with his father's gray eyes and his mother's quick mind. He learned to walk the mountain trails without fear, to identify animal tracks, to help with chores around the cabin. When James was 3, Zara became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, her body knowing what to expect. In the spring of 1883, they welcomed a daughter they named Ruth, after Zara's mother. She was tiny and delicate, the opposite of her robust brother, and both Barrett and James fell instantly in love with her. Life continued in its patterns. Winters spent snowed in, springs full of renewal, summers warm and lazy, autumns preparing for the cold again. Barrett and Zara's love deepened with time, growing from the passionate intensity of those early days into something steadier and even more powerful. They faced challenges, of course. There was the winter when James got sick with fever and they had to make a dangerous trip down to Fort Garland through a blizzard. There was the summer when a wildfire threatened the cabin and they had to evacuate to the stream with wet blankets. There was the year when Barrett injured his leg badly and couldn't work for months, forcing them to rely on the charity of friends in town. But they faced every challenge together, as a team, as partners. And on the other side of each difficulty, their bond was stronger than before. When James was 7 and Ruth was 4, Barrett came home one afternoon with news. They were sitting outside the cabin, the children playing nearby, when he cleared his throat nervously. "I got offered a job today," he said. "The territorial government wants to hire guides who know the mountains. They're planning to survey some of the high country for a potential railroad route. It would mean good money, steady work." Zara looked at him carefully. "Do you want to take it?" "Part of me does. The money would be useful. We could build a bigger cabin, make improvements, save for the children's future." He paused. "But it would mean being away from home for weeks at a time, and I don't know if I want to do that." "What does your heart tell you?" He was quiet for a long moment, watching James help Ruth climb a boulder. "My heart tells me that I didn't come to this mountain to get rich or be important. I came here to find peace and to build a life, and I've done that. With you, with our children. This is enough. More than enough." "Then turn down the job," Zara said simply. "We have everything we need right here." He pulled her close, grateful beyond words that he'd married a woman who understood what truly mattered. The years continued their march. James grew tall and strong, learning everything Barrett could teach him about living on the mountain. Ruth grew into a curious, bright child who asked endless questions about everything. Barrett's hair started showing gray at the temples. Zara's hands bore the calluses and scars of years of hard work. But when they looked at each other, they still saw the people they'd been that first day, the frightened woman in the stagecoach and the mountain man who'd carried her to safety. The connection that had formed in that moment had never weakened. If anything, it had only grown stronger. When James turned 12, he started making noises about wanting to see more of the world. Barrett understood he'd been young once, too, hungry for experience and adventure, but it still hurt to think about his son leaving the mountain eventually. "He'll come back," Zara said one night as they discussed it. "This place is in his blood now, same as it's in ours. He might go exploring, but he'll come home." "How do you know?" "Because he's our son, and because home isn't a place, it's the people you love. He'll always come back to us." She was right, of course. James did eventually go exploring. At 16, he spent a summer working in Denver, experiencing city life. But he came home sunburned and happy, declaring that the mountains were where he belonged. Ruth was different. She loved the mountain, but she also loved learning, reading, studying. When she was 14, they made the difficult decision to send her to live with Zara's aunt in Santa Fe during the school year, so she could get a proper education. It broke Zara's heart to be separated from her daughter, but she knew it was the right thing to do. "We're giving her choices," Barrett said, holding Zara as she cried the day they took Ruth to town. "That's what parents are supposed to do, give their children the tools and knowledge to choose their own path." "I know, it just hurts." "I know it does, but she'll be back every summer and we'll visit in the winter, and you're giving her the gift of education, of opportunity. Your mother would be proud." Ruth thrived in Santa Fe, writing long letters home about her studies and her friends. She came home every summer, and those reunions were joyous occasions. She brought books to share with her parents, new ideas to discuss, stories about the wider world. The years turned, and Barrett and Zara grew older. Their bodies bore the marks of hard-living aches and pains, scars and calluses, the general wear of time. But they were healthy and strong, still capable of the work the mountain demanded. James married a woman from Fort Garland when he was 22, a rancher's daughter named Sarah, who took to mountain life with enthusiasm. They built their own cabin 2 miles from Barrett and Zara's, close enough to help but far enough for independence. A year later, they made Barrett and Zara grandparents with the birth of a daughter they named Margaret. Holding his granddaughter for the first time, Barrett felt the circle complete itself. He thought back to that day in 1879 when a stagecoach had lost its wheels and he'd climbed into certain danger to save a stranger. He thought about how a single moment of courage had led to a full life, a loving family, to contentment deeper than he'd ever imagined possible. "What are you thinking about?" Zara asked. She was sitting beside him, watching their son and daughter-in-law with their new baby. "I'm thinking that I'm the luckiest man who ever lived," he said. "And I'm thinking about how strange life is, how one moment can change everything." "The stagecoach," she said. It wasn't a question. The stagecoach. If those wheels hadn't broken, if I hadn't been hunting nearby that day, if you'd been sitting in a different seat. He shook his head. So many little things that had to happen exactly right. "I think we were always meant to find each other," Zara said. "Maybe not that exact way, but somehow. Some people are just meant to be together." He looked at her, at the silver threading through her dark hair, at the laugh lines around her eyes, at the hands that had worked beside his for all these years. She was more beautiful to him now than she'd been at 22, because now he knew her completely. Every scar had a story. Every line had been earned through living. "I love you," he said. "More today than yesterday and less than tomorrow." "That's poetry, Barrett Morrow. When did you get so eloquent?" "I've been practicing for years. You just never noticed." She laughed, and the sound filled him with joy. After all these years, he could still make her laugh. Ruth returned from Santa Fe for good when she was 20, having completed her education. She announced her intention to become a teacher, and within a year she'd established a small school in Fort Garland for the children of ranchers and miners. She married a young doctor who'd moved to the territory from Philadelphia, and they built a house in town with a view of the mountains. Barrett and Zara split their time between the mountain cabin and a small house they'd built in Fort Garland, wanting to be close to both their children, but not quite ready to give up their mountain home. The arrangement worked well, giving them the best of both worlds. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Barrett took Zara back up to the mountain cabin for a week alone. Their children were grown and settled. Their grandchildren were being cared for by others. It was just the two of them, like it had been at the beginning. They walked the familiar trails, visited the places that had become meaningful over the years. Barrett showed Zara the exact spot where he'd first heard the stagecoach crash. They stood at the edge of the cliff where the coach had gone over, looking down at the valley far below. "I was terrified," Zara admitted. "I thought I was going to die, and then you appeared, and somehow I knew I'd be safe." "I was terrified too. I'm good at hiding it, but climbing into that coach, not knowing if we'd both go over the edge, it was the most frightened I've been since the war." "Why did you do it then?" He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her from behind, so they were both facing the valley. "Because when I looked at you through that window, something in me recognized something in you. I didn't understand it then, but I do now. My soul knew yours, and I couldn't let you die before I had a chance to know you." She turned in his arms, reaching up to touch his face. There was gray in his beard now, and lines around his eyes, but those gray eyes were still as steady and sure as they'd been the first day. "You carried me down this mountain on your back," she said. "In every way that matters, you've been carrying me ever since, supporting me, loving me, making me stronger." "We've been carrying each other," he corrected. "That's what marriage is. That's what love is. Taking turns being strong when the other one needs it." That night, they made love in the bed they'd shared for 20 years, in the cabin Barrett had built with his own hands on the mountain that had become their home. And afterward, lying wrapped together in the darkness, listening to the familiar sounds of the wind in the pines, they both felt the perfect rightness of their life together. The years continued to pass, bringing change and constancy in equal measure. James and Sarah had 3 more children, filling their home with noise and laughter. Ruth and her husband had 2 boys, both as curious and bright as their mother. Barrett and Zara became fixtures in Fort Garland, respected elders who'd earned their place through years of hard work and honest living. Barrett still trapped and hunted, though not as extensively as before. His body wasn't as young as it once was, and he had to be more careful, but he couldn't imagine stopping entirely. The mountain was in his blood, and he needed the solitude of the high country the way he needed air. Zara had taken up writing in her later years, recording the history of Fort Garland and the stories of the people who lived there. Her accounts were detailed and vivid, capturing a way of life that was already starting to change as more people moved west and the territory became more civilized. On a spring day in 1899, Barrett woke to find Zara already up, sitting at the table with a cup of coffee and a distant look in her eyes. "What is it?" he asked, joining her. "I was just thinking about my mother. She died when she was 43. I'm 42 now." She looked at him. "I've been worried for the past year that I wouldn't live to see 43, that I'd inherited her weak lungs. But I woke up this morning and realized I feel fine, strong, healthy." "You're going to live to be 100, Barrett said firmly. "You're too stubborn to die young." "Maybe. But if I do die tomorrow, I want you to know that I've had a wonderful life, a life better than I ever dreamed possible. You gave me that, Barrett, you and this mountain and our family. You gave it to yourself. You were brave enough to stay when it would have been easier to leave, brave enough to build a life that made no sense on paper, but perfect sense in reality." He took her hand. "And you're not dying anytime soon. We've got years left, you and I. Years and years." He was right. They celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary, then their 30th. Their children gave them grandchildren, and those grandchildren started having children of their own. The family grew and expanded, roots going deep into the Colorado soil. Barrett and Zara eventually gave up the mountain cabin to James and Sarah, deciding they were too old to handle the harsh winters anymore. They settled permanently in Fort Garland, in the house with the mountain view. But every summer they spent a few weeks at the cabin, and Barrett still took annual trips into the high country, unable to completely let go of the wilderness that had shaped him. On their 40th wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered for a celebration. Children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren filled the house and spilled out into the yard. There was food and music and laughter, and in the middle of it all, Barrett and Zara stood together, surveying their legacy. "We did good," Zara said softly. "We did better than good," Barrett corrected. "We did extraordinary." That night, after everyone had gone home and they were alone again, they sat on the porch watching the stars come out over the mountains. "Do you ever think about that day?" Zara asked. "The day the stagecoach lost its wheels?" "All the time. How could I not? That was the day my life really began." "Mine too." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Such a small thing, really. A broken axle. Bad luck. But it led to everything good in my life. Sometimes the worst moments lead to the best outcomes. We just have to be brave enough to see the opportunity in the disaster." "I wasn't brave. I was terrified. You were brave enough to trust me, brave enough to stay, brave enough to love me even though it made no sense. That's the truest kind of bravery there is." They sat in comfortable silence, hands intertwined, watching the familiar stars wheel overhead. The mountain rose dark against the sky, eternal and unchanging. Somewhere up there, in a cabin they had built together, their son was putting his own children to bed, passing on the stories and traditions they had established. The circle was complete, the legacy was secure, and the love that had started with a broken stagecoach and a dangerous rescue had grown into something that would outlast them both. Barrett and Zara Morrow lived into their 70s, surrounded by family, respected in their community, content with the lives they'd built. When Barrett finally passed away in the winter of 1927, Zara held his hand and told him she'd see him again soon. She followed him less than a year later, dying peacefully in her sleep with her children around her. They were buried together in the Fort Garland Cemetery, on a hill with a view of the mountains. Their headstone was simple: Barrett Morrow, 1849-1927, and Zara Morrow, 1857-1928. Together, forever. But their true monument was the family they'd created, the lives they'd touched, the love they'd shared. Generations later, their descendants still told the story of how it all began with a stagecoach that lost its wheels on a mountain pass and a mountain man who carried a frightened young woman down to safety on his back. It was a story about courage and chance, about risk and reward, about the moment when two souls recognized each other across the distance and chose to leap into the unknown together. It was a love story, pure and simple, and it proved that sometimes the most unlikely beginnings led to the most beautiful endings. The mountains still stood, eternal and unchanging. But the love between Barrett and Zara Morrow had left its mark on those peaks just as surely as wind and weather, carving something permanent into the landscape of time.